There was an experiment done many years back when a monkey and a monkey's baby was thrown into a water pond, and water was continuously poured. So till the time the monkey could save the child, the monkey tried to save. And eventually he realized that only one could survive, and the monkey decided to drop the baby and then jump out of the that box full of water. So that's precisely the story of how ESG is working now.
Can firms be forced to be socially responsible? Partly yes, partly no, is what our research indicates. It depends. The context matters.
I think having a mandate for CSR spending is a double-edged sword.
I will not tell that because of this CSR mandate, companies have suddenly become socially responsible. It's like we are having Dowry Prohibition Act and all. Still, dowry continues.
This ESG, CSR, sustainability, we use similar words for somewhat dissimilar type of concepts. But for today's session, we would consider everything as same. And at the end of the day, I mean, if we want to concise it, we are looking for companies to do something non-financial in nature also, to have certain impact on the society around them, the various stakeholders also. The expectation is not only companies should make profits and do financially well, they should also do good socially. That's the expectation that we are living in today. Right. So where does the role of regulation comes into it is a big question, and that's the topic for today. So far, the understanding is this CSR or ESG is something voluntarily. People do that, companies do that, even though there is no regulation forcing that. Yet, across the world, be it EU, China, Australia, South Africa, US to some extent, governments are intervening. And the most popular mechanism so far has been mandatory disclosure, wherein companies will say, this is what we have done in the space of ESG or CSR. At best, they will say that we have done nothing, but they need to disclose. And the idea is the invisible hand of market would work. There is a mixed evidence in this in terms of international findings. Invariably, whenever these type of regulations are imposed, the profitability or stock price of the companies hurt, but the social causes do pick up. Across the world, people have seen that once you start forcing companies to disclose what they're doing with emission norms or economic inequalities, those indicators pick up. India took a very drastic step by coming up with a new regulation, which is more like a game changer. We are not asking companies to disclose what you're doing. In 2013, a rule came that you have to spend, not just talk, you have to spend 2% of your profits if certain conditions, financial conditions are met in terms of certain size, profitability, book value. Right? And thankfully, there is some discretion at the companies how to spend that. And that responsibility is given to the board. And therefore, the question that can boards help in achieving this objective? This experiment as such is having an enormous potential with so many companies around there. The estimate is roughly about $2 billion would be spent in this sphere. And therefore, if you think in terms of externalities with so many of NGOs out there, they all will be strengthened by the way of partnerships, and therefore some social good can come out of it. That's the hope, that's the expectation. The question is, would it work? And the biggest problem is that there are more than 200 papers, academic papers on that, and the evidence is mixed. Some say that if you do good socially, you will also do financially, and some don't find that finding. The fundamental critique is, how can you make something mandatory when it is voluntary in nature? While all the critiques of mandatory spending is absolutely correct, there is other side of the story also. In the sense that it's a soft regulation. there is a big list of activities where companies can spend. They can write a check to PM Care Fund or whatever, that is a CSR, but they can also pick up a lot of activities. There is also flexibility in terms of how you want to do. I mean, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are plenty of NGOs out there who are doing excellent work, so you can partner with them. You can start your own foundation, or you can have your own employees do this. We believe that there might be some good out of it after all. And to test that, what we do is we look at the ESG ratings, and that's where things get tricky for us. How do you measure social impact? That depends on what you have in mind, what is close to your heart, right? And it's extremely difficult to measure that. And as a more parsimonious measure, we look at the ratings given by independent agencies about how a company is doing along these three dimensions. And we compare these ratings of Indian companies which are affected by this regulation with the companies rest of the world, where there is no such regulation. These companies are coming from US, EU, China, Australia, across the world. And what we find is across the world, the ratings or the performance measurement is kind of stable over time. But in India, the ratings have gone up. That means there is some real impact. And it's not across the board. Okay, so the increase in ratings is more pronounced in the companies which were not spending earlier. We also find that if a company is doing this CSR via some opaque trusts, that's where there is no increase in ratings. But if they are partnering with established NGOs or they are doing it directly, that's where we see some improvement in ratings. And finally, we do find that whichever companies have engaged ESG experts as their board members, that's where we see a more impact. So, to sum it up, can firms be forced to be socially responsible? Partly yes, partly no, is what our research indicates. It depends. The context matters. What measures we are using to capture the outcome, that matters. The granularity of data matters. So that's from the academic side of this topic. And we would now solicit views from our panelists.
Now, firstly, I think having a mandate for CSR spending is a double-edged sword. Yes, it's good because it's meant for development, it's meant for societal good and a whole host of things. But let's not forget the fact that what ends up happening is driven by, the reality of company interest, shareholder interest, stakeholder interest. And when I say stakeholder, I mean the larger polity and other such interests. So although it is a noble mandate, what drives it may not really come from a place of similar nobility. That's one. Secondly, in terms of having to spend, is what is the reason that has spawned so many foundations, and that underlies the fact that there is an inherent distrust that not-for-profit organizations, NGOs, particularly the smaller ones who work at the ground level, the big ones are okay. They have their processes in place, they have all their finance and HR and all the other stuff in place, so you don't mind dealing with them because they have capacity to deliver to what you want them to report on. But the ones who do the real hard work at the ground level are not the ones who are being funded directly in any way, because you are concerned that they may not be able to do it in the way that you want them to do it, but also not making the effort to build their capacity to be able to do so.
I will not tell that because of this CSR mandate, companies have suddenly become socially responsible. It's like we are having Dowry Prohibition Act and all. Still, dowry continues. So this cannot make any corporate immediately socially responsible. Government regulation, consumer demand, investor pressure, all these are ways in which companies can become socially responsible. And here we have made a mandatory CSR. Of course, from being a philanthropy item or not a board item, Now it has become a board item, and board has been made responsible for implementing CSR. But what I find is it's evolving in India, and therefore most of the projects which we are funding or implementing are only resulting in the 2% being spent. Most of the activities we don't study about what change this CSR is effecting. I'll just share one experience. Once a corporate had told that government schools are not having drinking water facility. So the board was telling, hey, we should do CSR, why don't we divert CSR funds there? And immediately all the branches were told, you give aquaguard facility to all the government schools. Within a month, we don't know what has happened. Many of the schools didn't know what to do with this. Water, even supply of water was not there. Aquaguard maintenance was not happening. Electricity was not there. My view is that most of the things are being done with a short-term aim only. Like as long as my duration as chairman or board directors, all these are there, I will have some CSR activity to be done. The impact of CSR funds is not being studied at all.
So there's a small story. I will not go into the exact detail. There was an experiment done many years back when a monkey and a monkey's baby was thrown into a water pond, and water was continuously poured. So till the time the monkey could save the child, the monkey tried to save. And eventually he realized that only one could survive, and the monkey decided to drop the baby and then jump out of the that box full of water. So that's precisely the story of how ESG is working now. Two railway tracks never meet. Governance as understood under the Companies Act, with the kind of stringent regulations that everybody has, with the kind of adherence which the board has to follow, as rightly said and repeated by all, board does not understand the basic characteristic of an NGO, how it works, because they've never done it. Nobody has gone to the field, soiled their hands, been to a poor man's house, ever tasted the water, ever tasted how food looks like, other than politicians who once in a while do it for fancy things, but nobody does it. So that's the reality of life, right? So for us to expect that suddenly, just because they are charitable, they will understand and they will appreciate whatever is happening, it requires far more effort than that. So there is a gap definitely over there. So everything happens in balance. Your CSR activities need to happen in balance. Your social sector engagement needs to happen in a balance. As a corporate entity, you need to understand the social dimension of imbalance.